Now, in the same vein as doing some reviews on some Hebrew grammar texts, Sue Groom has written a very beautifully interesting book called Linguistic Analysis of Biblical Hebrew. And she explains the underlying principles of what is a word and where does meaning reside. Is it in the word? Is it in the sentence that the word is used? Is it in the paragraph that the sentence is in, that the word is in? And so on and so forth. And she gives this is basically a more of a linguistic, philosophical analysis of the themes of meaning and how studying the etymology of a word can help you. That's not the final answer, but the etymology of the word can be extremely helpful to give us clues, as well as what is called the semantic domain, how the word is used and what it meant to an ancient author as opposed to a modern author, and how various different ancient authors used this word in contexts, how its meaning is reflected and changed, the various nuances of the word, based on whether it's used in a context of war or in a context of peace. That's my example. And I've taken copious notes of this. It's not a big book. It's 2003. It's relatively new. It's only 200 pages. Her bibliography is fabulous. Oh, man. I only found another $6,000 worth of books I want to buy. Oh, criminy. And she does a pretty good job explaining it. It is a somewhat technical manual. The language isn't as simple as it could be, but she does make her points as she gets them across. It's sensational how she analyzes the different meanings of words, such as man-made in the image of God. I thought her analysis of that was extremely well done. I was very interested in that. And how the meaning of a word is determined. And she describes why the text means different things for different readers and the same reader at different times. As she explores the history of the Masoretic text, she discusses the significance that the Masoretic text, now Emmanuel Tov in his fabulous book, Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible, which I call a 5-star book, I'll tell you that right now. Sue Groom's book is a 4-star book. It is really powerful because in finding the different techniques that we use to gain hints for the hapax legomena, I believe is what it's called. In other words, words that are used only once in Hebrew. And so you don't have recourse to go through the various texts in the Hebrew Old Testament to find out its meaning and its various nuances because it's only used once. But she describes how we can gain clues from the etymology, from the semantic domain that it's used in, the theme of the chapter. She describes 5 or 6, maybe 7 different techniques on how to approach a text, and she uses Judges chapter 4 in the most masterful analysis I have ever seen. It is fabulous how she spends the first half of the book describing comparative philology, how to compare the various styles of words, how they are written, what they mean in one context as opposed to another, how to use the lexicons, how to use the dictionaries, how to use the critical apparatus in the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. She describes the development of the Masoretic text. Now, the Masoretic text is not the original Old Testament, the underlying Hebrew of our current Old Testament. This is not the original that existed and came down from antiquity for us. This is one of the families of texts that just happened to survive from antiquity. The Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrate, she discusses that a little bit too, the scrolls demonstrate that there were other families of texts. They had bits and pieces of those, but even those haven't survived wholesale like the Masoretic text has. So we don't necessarily have the original Bible. We have one of the families of texts that survived the ravages of time and war, flood, and famine, and so on and so forth. That's all that is. And that's kind of startling. That's very interesting, isn't it? Well, and then she describes the total analysis of her chapter in Judges 4 was just so brilliant. And she describes the various interactions with the Hebrew scholars and the biblical scholars. There are some scholars who really favor studying etymology. And that's fun for me too. There's other scholars who say, well, that can be deceptive. What we need to do is study the semantic domain. And there are other scholars who say, well, that's important also, but what we have to do is gain the context of the content. And how do you do that? How do you understand context? I used to simplistically think, well, what you do is you read the whole chapter. Would to goodness that it was that simple. It's not. But it's doable, so don't get discouraged that way. She talks about the lexical semantics of the various types of words, not only in relation to biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek, because she explores the Septuagint also, but what about how those words are used in the classical Greek world, or other cultures where there has been cultural influence and overlap, and how did they understand the meanings of the words? And she discusses Philo, Josephus, some of the classical Greeks, Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Xenophon, some of the classical Greek literature that's come down to us, Thucydides and Herodotus, and so on and so forth. What did they explain the meaning of certain words to be, and how come they're different, or how come they're similar? And so you pretty soon gain the impression that there is potential enormous range of meaning of words, that when we read a translation, and I've said this before, and Sue Groom is superb at showing this. She's one of the very best I've found. That's why I give her a 4-star rating. Sensational book. You must get this book. It's good. But she shows how the meanings of words, the meanings of sentences, and so on and so forth, can only be understood by getting to the original language. What we have in our English translations is one singular interpretation or translation. But that may not even be the meaning of the entire story. And she shows various ways how